introduction. One of the jobs of the parish priest of St Joseph's, because we're in such close proximity to the Basin Reserve down here, a noted cricket ground, is that we become the official chaplains to the New Zealand cricket team. So if you can think of a harder job than that, there's not too many of them around. Praying that they have a win anywhere. But in cricketing terms, the final batsman is the number 11 batsman, and they're usually not considered particularly adept. So I'm filling the number 11 batsman role. But it's a very important and central topic to our living of the faith, the welcoming of the stranger. So we're going to think about that a little bit for a few minutes, and then I'm going to give you some case studies to look at particular situations and what you might do in your parish if this happened to you. It may already have happened to you or your parish. But just to think around that idea of who is the stranger and what that term may mean. Of course, in the scriptures, the welcome to the widow and the orphan and the stranger in the land is something that comes from the First Testament of the scriptures. And the people of Israel are reminded to welcome the stranger among them, because at one time they too were strangers in the land. And then, of course, the way that Jesus welcomed the people who came to him in all sorts of ways, people who were rejected by the society of his time. And we've had examples of that, thought of those today, those who were sick, the lepers, the Samaritan woman. In that sense, the welcoming of the stranger, the example of that, is given to us very strongly. So let's think a little bit about that term first of all. Who is the stranger? Who is the other person? In modern philosophy, the word other with a big O has been taken to mean the person who is different from you culturally, gender-wise, nationality, linguistically, all that kind of thing. It can also be seen for human beings as the divine other. God is the other. God, in a sense, in modern society, because of the process of secularization, is sometimes seen as a stranger, someone who speaks a different language. So in fact, welcoming the stranger has a dimension, even philosophically, apart from the scriptures welcoming God. But we, from our Christian background, are given that in a very special way, as Archbishop John quoted in his talk this morning. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. That great text from Matthew 25 about what the nations will be judged on. Not just individuals, not just you and me as individuals, but the nations will be judged on whether they fed the hungry, or clothed the naked, or welcomed the stranger. Sometimes we take that text very individualistically. Well, what did I do in this case? It's important, but it's a group thing too, that question of judgment. It's not about an individual judgment, it's about a judgment of the nations. So we can apply those things on a bigger term too. But welcoming the stranger is central to what we're called to be as Christians. So who is the stranger? What is this thing called a stranger? Someone who is different from us in all sorts of ways. They could look different, they could smell different, they could act differently to us, the majority of us. And the next question will be, who is us? Who do we define as us? Because the stranger is someone who's different from me or from us. So the two things we're just going to think about for a few minutes. Who do we consider strangers? Who are we not comfortable with? Who do we kind of, even without thinking, avoid? Ooh, too difficult to go there or be close to that person. Because that's the stranger. And there can be all sorts of reasons why we avoid those people as individuals, as groups. Even say those people, there's this whole separating process, isn't it? And this is what the idea of a stranger is. Yes, there are new people who are different from us, but when we start calling them those people, we're really making that chasm very wide. So it's good to think about who are those people that make us uncomfortable, who we would steer away from. Sometimes a thing I like to do is, just because we get comfortable in our places, we might even have been doing it here today. Have you sat mostly in the same place? Down here? Because we do. I guess we can take it from people we have. And one of the things, of course, that happens is we'll tend to sit close to certain people for most of the time. That happens in our churches, and not sit closer to other people. So sometimes I've said to people on a Sunday, get up and go and sit somewhere different. Very disturbing for people in the church on Sunday morning. And in actual fact, some years ago, I'm told that the US bishops wrote a pastoral letter about questions of relations between ethnicities in the American church, the North American church, and they said the most segregated place in the United States is churches on a Sunday. Sunday morning is the most segregated areas because people will go, and it's partly we all do it, we seek, especially when we're praying, to go where we're comfortable. So whether it's our linguistic group or our ethnic group or whatever, people would all over the place. It's understandable, and to some extent it's necessary, because particularly for migrant groups they need the support of their linguistic groupings. But is it good? And I think Karen spoke very much and very well about the sort of things that they've been working on in Newtown in terms of bringing people together and the challenge and the journey that is, and the listening that's required. But there does need to be a recognition, and a good thing, a good examination of conscience for us is, who do we consider strangers? If we walk out into the room for the cup of tea, who do we automatically head towards? So these are all kind of things that happen, and I think one of the important things in parishes is that we find ways to encourage people to break down those barriers. Don't always go and talk to the people you always talk to. Go and talk to someone new. Even if there might be a language barrier, go and talk with them, sit with them. Find ways to break down that otherness and that separation. When we talk about the stranger, it's strange to us or me, but who is this us that we're talking about? That's another good thing to think about. Who's this us? Who do we consider us? Who's my people? Now, all of us need a sense of identity of who we are. And part of hospitality is an important thing. We heard about, someone mentioned the people who are doing the welcoming seem very proud to do that. And that's because it increases your mana in a way to offer hospitality to others. If you have the resources and the ability to welcome others, that increases your own mana and dignity and worth. But one of the words for that, for offering hospitality, is manakitanga. And one of the translations of that I've heard is to build up the mana of the other. So that when you welcome the other, your mana is built up, but the process of real welcoming is to build up the dignity and worth of the other person as well. So it's a process of giving in all senses of the word and encouraging the other to come forward. So it's important that we have a sense of who we are as a parish. That was a conversation that Karen talked about that they had. What were the gifts they had? What was the history they had? What did they have to offer? And it's important for all of us that we have a sense of who we are. But it can become a closed sense of who we are. And so that image of the open circle that the Archbishop put up there is a very important one. Because circles can also be closed circles. You can have a circle where you're all in together like this, and it's very hard for anyone to break into that circle. But if you've done those games where people form a circle, and they're all talking together to one another, facing each other, and you're the stranger and you come up and try and get into that circle. And there's all sorts of ways you can keep people out. Someone comes up on this side, so you move around just slightly to block them. Or you don't hear when they sort of clear their throat, just to let you know they're there. There's all sorts of ways, subtle ways, that we can block people out. And that's the narrow sense, the bad sense of us. This place belongs to us. All these people, new people have arrived in our parish and they want to sing different hymns. We don't do that here. Who's the we? Who's got ownership? Whose parish is it, by the way? Is it your parish or God's parish? So that balance between having a healthy sense of identity and yet having the openness in the circle to bring people in, and new people will make us change our ways. Or may make us change our ways. So that's the openness, if you like, to God. Because when we're, in a sense, very self-satisfied with ourselves, and think we've got our plans all worked out, then God comes along to upset them. Timothy Radcliffe often says that, doesn't it? How do you make God laugh? You tell him what your plans are. And the next thing is that when we are talking about the stranger, often we're projecting, well, this person is different from us in some way. They don't act the same as us. I don't understand their language. I don't understand why they're doing this. I'll keep myself safe by pushing them away or separating myself from this dangerous situation. And there are times when that's important. But we're always being invited to welcome the stranger, but also to recognise the stranger within ourselves. Because sometimes we're putting out there parts of ourselves that we don't want to go near either. Parts of ourselves that aren't so sure, that are more timid, that are fearful. And because we're afraid of entering into those areas, we project them onto those people, or those are very scary people over there. So we're projecting out there our fears and pushing them away. Sometimes, and I'm no expert in these kind of things, we talk about each person, each of us has a shadow side. The part of us that we either don't like to look at, don't like to acknowledge, are afraid of, and yet, for our healing, we can't reject half of ourselves. To be a whole person, both the light side and the shadow side need to work together, work in harmony, need to talk to each other. Oh, so that's what you've got to offer me. That's a part of me that's a bit weak, or I need to encourage, to help grow. The growth of the shadow side of us makes us as individuals become whole. This only takes a lifetime and a half. But the integration of that helps us to become whole as individuals, and when we integrate the other people that we're afraid of or that we're rejecting, our community becomes whole. It just occurred to me that perhaps the process of the last 30 years of the recognition, the greater recognition of the Treaty of Waitangi, is a process of recognition of, from the non-Māori side, of the fact that if we're going to be a whole nation, we need to recognise that forgotten treaty, because it was forgotten or rejected for over 100 years. We need to recognise and welcome that into part of our national life if we're going to be whole. Because it was signed, 20 years later a judge said it's a nullity, it doesn't exist. And so it was written out of all our laws up until the 1970s, 100 years. And slowly the acknowledgement and recognition of it, because there were people who pushed and said, no, we've got to look at this, is, I hope, helping us to be more whole as a people, as a nation. So that could be an example of the integration for the dominant Pākehā side of the country, or non-Māori side, of the importance of what we see as the other side. So, to welcome the other is to welcome God in some way. a disturbing God, a God that might shake us up. And how do we do that? How do we equip ourselves to welcome the stranger? Well, I think in many of the things that have been said today, particularly in Karen's presentation, I think we've had very good examples of how to do that, because welcoming one another is also about welcoming the stranger. The stranger isn't always the person who comes from outside. The stranger may be among us, sitting among us every Sunday, and we don't recognise how we are separate from those people. But here are some ways, again, I think we've heard some of these, but know yourself and your story. What is your history as a parish, as a people, as a person? When have you felt like a stranger? Go back to that sense and feeling, because it will be common for others as well. My own experience of having to go into another culture and learn another language by immersion, and the whole process of taking down your personality, going back to being a baby, because that's what they told us as the language learning process. I would look across the table of the family where I was staying for a few months in language school, and they had a 6-month-old baby, and I could see the family talking to that baby. Baby wasn't old enough to talk back, but it was understanding a lot more than I was understanding. I was there 3 months at that stage. I was trying to comfort myself. I said, well, I did have 9 months in the womb, so I shouldn't really put myself down like this. But that's what you do when you learn a new language. You start as a baby, you build up your vocabulary and your understanding. But in that process too, all the different cultural ways, struggling with those and being a stranger to those, but also in that process the experience of being welcomed by the local people despite and because of my inadequacies. I've told many people this story, but I'll tell it again here. One of the things in Spanish or in any language is words that they call false friends. That look like a word that you know, sometimes sound like a word that you know, but have a completely different meaning. And so they had a word in Spanish, embarazada, which looked and sounded like the word embarrassed. So of course when I was learning the language and I'd make a mistake and I'd say, lo siento, estoy embarazada, thinking I was saying, I'm sorry, I feel very embarrassed. But what I was actually saying was, I'm sorry, I'm pregnant. It did raise a few eyebrows. So that experience of being a stranger, knowing when we've experienced that, and knowing too, and this is it's a long process, what are our own weakness and shadow places? Because then, if we accept them and recognise them in ourselves, we can recognise and accept them in others. We are all a broken people. And the other thing is learn how to listen to the story of another person. And Archbishop John gave 4 ways of listening there this morning: downloading, debating, reflective dialogue and generative dialogue. And that whole process of reflective dialogue and generative dialogue takes some skill. To listen to yourself and to listen to another at the same time, non-defensively. I'm thinking this because last night I was engaged in a conversation around death. There was a discussion about death, very good discussion down at the trade aid store. About 30 of us there talking about different experiences, what does death mean, all that kind of thing. And there was one group there that was advocating for physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia. So I stepped out of my reflective dialogue mode and got into debating, which changed the mode of things. I stopped listening to some extent. But that whole process of welcoming the stranger, and it could be someone you disagree with deeply, how do you deal with that? It takes some practice and it takes some listening. And of course, again, the first person you have to listen to and what's going on is what's happening in yourself. And that's not always easy when you're under pressure or you're feeling you have to justify some position or things like that. Not that, for instance, last time I thought I was doing something wrong, but I realised that I got into a particular mode of listening and arguing that perhaps wasn't so helpful in that situation. So, that process of listening to ourselves, listening to God, prayer, all those kind of things are central to listening to the other person, to welcoming the stranger. Thank you very much.